I want to thank all the people in our church family. I want to thank you for your faithfulness, for your strength. And because of the fact that we are not able to gather here at the church building, life goes on. The, the crisis that we're dealing with in our nation is it's real, but it's not the only thing you're dealing with. The stuff that you would be dealing with without the overriding crisis that everybody's talking about and thinking about, you got your own personal issues. Just received a notice right before I stepped up here as one of the sisters in the church has got chest pains. And I can't go see her. She's not asking me to see her. We got her on the prayer line. Uh, it's just times where things are different, and you're having to go through your situations alone. You can get on the phone, you can text, and all the other things we have for communication, but for the most part, you're forced to live and experience your life alone. And I want you to know that I'm praying for you, and I'm so looking forward to when we're able to get back together. Uh, it's going to be a good time. I'm thankful for the people who have been coming here to the church and sitting in their cars out in the parking lot, and they just pray. They don't feel comfortable coming in, so they stay in their cars. But they get as close to the church as they can, and they come and they sit in the parking lot and they talk to God. God can hear them at home. God can hear them anywhere, but there's something about this building, this gathering place. It's not holy because that it's got the word church on it, but it's holy because people gather here to worship and pray. And people have been gathering here this week and just pulling up on the parking lot and praying. And I appreciate each and every one of you. We're going to be reading tonight from the book of Mark, chapter 11, verse 22 through 24. And Jesus answering saith unto them, have faith in God. For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you shall have them. I believe in prayer. I have seen prayer provide jobs when there weren't jobs. I have seen prayer change the attitude of family members, change the attitude of friends and coworkers. I have seen prayer heal sick people. And at the risk of appearing to be faithless, I want to talk about the fact that there are times when I pray, maybe not you, but there are times when I pray. There are occasions in my walk with God when I pray that my prayer doesn't seem to be answered. I remind God of his promises. I remind God of this particular verse. And I have high expectations when I pray, and the issue that I'm praying about remains glaring in my face. The mountain that I'm praying for and praying about remains. These unmoved mountains cause questions to surface. Maybe I didn't really have faith. Is there something wrong in my life? Can I really trust God with this issue or with any of his promises? Why doesn't God fix this? Why doesn't God do this? Now, it may be that you've never experienced unanswered prayers, and it may be that everything you've ever asked from God, He's fulfilled it, and He's given it to you just as you've requested. And if this has been your experience, then you probably will need to dial me out, and you might want to go do something else with your time. Because this lesson is focused toward those people who have prayed for God to do something, and the issue remained. If you have mountains that remained, then we're going to talk about three things that you need to remember while those mountains stand tall in your life. The first thing you need to remember, if a prayer is not answered, if a mountain is not removed in your life, first thing to remember is that God's not guilty. God didn't create disease, and God did not create crisis. When God created the planet, when God created people, He created people to live forever. When God created the planet and God created people, He created everything in total and complete peace. There was no pain. There was no suffering. There was nothing that hurt. Everything was peaceful. When God created Adam and Eve, the only way that pain and suffering and crisis could enter into God's creation is if the people that God created disobeyed God. It was sin that introduced into the world sickness. It was sin that introduced into the world pain and death and conflict. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, "The thief cometh not but to steal," and he was speaking of the devil, the enemy. "The thief cometh not but to steal, to kill, and destroy. I am come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly." God provided a way that in this world that's full of pain and sickness and death, He provided a way that we could be born again. He provided a way that we could start life all over again, that we could receive abundant life. But this abundant life that we receive from God, this beautiful, wonderful birth that God gives to us and provides for us, where we are a part of His family, this abundant life still resides in a broken planet. We are redeemed from a fallen race, but we're still confined to the limitations and certain limitations that is a part of our world. There are still accidents, and there are still human error. There is still disease. These are all facts of life on planet Earth. This is the result of sin in the world. God didn't create that. It was created as a result of sin. The second thing that I would advise you to remember whenever you're dealing with a mountain that hasn't been removed, the second thing is, as a wise believer will not feel defeated when a mountain seems to win for the moment. If a mountain remains, a wise believer, a mature believer will not feel defeated by that. Our walk with God doesn't guarantee that life will be without trials. Job observed in Job chapter 5, verse 7, "Yet man is born unto trouble," because that's part of our world. "Yet man is born unto trouble, just as sure as sparks fly upward from a fire." A man or a woman is going to experience trouble. That's not fatalistic. That's not faithless. It's just a fact that our faith is going to be met with test. When we focus on results, when we focus on productivity, then we open ourselves up for frustration. We can pray, oh God, my finger's bleeding. Would you heal my finger? Stop my finger from bleeding. And we open our eyes and it's still bleeding. And then our next prayer is, oh, I'm a failure and God's a failure. And we're all upset because we've prayed for our bleeding finger and it still remains bleeding. Our opening scripture in Mark chapter 11 is powerful. It's inspiring. It's faith building. Verily I say unto thee, whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but he shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you shall have them. All of us have quoted this verse at mountains. All of us has quoted this verse at crisis and at diseases that we've been involved with. And while we pray and we remind God of this verse, we keep one eye open, watching to see if the mountain is being removed. And when the mountain still remains, it bothers us. It causes us to wonder. It raises questions in our minds. But the key to this promise that we have read in Mark chapter 11, the key to this promise is found in the verse right above the promise. And that verse says, and Jesus answering them said unto them, have faith in God. Have faith in God. There were what we call the three Hebrews. That was in Babylon. They were standing in front of a king. He was powerful. He was reigning over the then known world at that time. He was powerful. He was angry. He was angry with them. He was threatening to kill them. This wasn't an imaginary crisis. This wasn't simply an irritation in their lives. They were in imminent danger, and the consequences was come down on them in just a matter of minutes. They were facing a real crisis. And we find in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16 through 18, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. And the matter was, let me digress just a little bit. This king had built an image, and he had instructed everybody to gather and to worship that image. And there was an orchestra that would play, and when that orchestra played, everybody was to bow and to worship the image, this idol that he had created. And so these three men remained standing, and it just infuriated the king. And so now he's threatening to throw them into a fiery furnace. He's threatening to burn them alive. And so he's going to give them another chance. And now then, the orchestra's going to play again. Everybody's going to worship again, and they're going to get another opportunity to worship the image. And that's when they said, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. If it be so, this is verse 17, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from this burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But here's three words, key words, but if not. We believe our God's able to move this mountain. We believe our God is able to handle this fiery furnace, but if not, if that mountain remains, if that furnace remains, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Our God's able, but if he chooses not to, our faith still remains in God. And Jesus said in Mark 11:22, have faith in God. The three Hebrews were not results oriented. They were focused on God. They weren't focused on the fact that God was going to deliver them. They were focused on the fact that God was able to deliver them. And that whatever God chose to do with that furnace, whatever God chose to do with that mountain didn't matter. As far as they were concerned, their trust and their faith remained in God. They still believed that God could do it, and they would believe it until they died. We find in Mark chapter 4, the disciples are in a storm. They had been with a crowd of people, with a multitude of people. Jesus had performed great miracles. And when they sent the multitude away, they took Jesus, even as he was, in the ship. And there were also with him other little ships. And there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And Jesus was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awaked him, and they say unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose, he rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. First thing that Jesus did was prove to those disciples that he could stop the storm immediately. But then he asked them, where's your faith? Jesus was expecting these disciples to believe in him in the storm. Jesus was expecting the disciples to believe in him if the storm kept raging. Jesus wanted them to believe that when the storm was raging, even though it was raging, that Jesus was in control and that he was able to change the circumstances had he chosen to. He wanted them to believe in him regardless of the circumstances. He wanted them to trust in him regardless of the outcome and whatever the circumstances looked like on the outside. He wanted them to believe if the circumstances never changed. It's important for you and I to remember. It's important for you and I to understand that there are times that God may need that mountain in our life. That God is using that mountain to perfect us, to grow us, to develop us. We find in Mark chapter 11, for verily I say unto thee, whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe those things which he shall say shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he says. But before you say anything, you have to go through verse 22. And that verse, that's the verse right above the promise. Have faith in God. We find the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7. And lest I should be exalted above measure because of the abundance of the revelation, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing, this thorn, this mountain, I besought the Lord 3 times, that it might depart from me. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, because that God's grace is sufficient, his strength is made perfect in my weakness. Because of that, Paul says, I will rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. I take pleasure in reproaches and in necessities and persecutions. I take pleasure in distress for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. The apostle wanted the mountain to be gone. He prayed against that mountain, but God was using that mountain to make some changes in Paul, to keep Paul from being lifted up in his own self. Because of the abundance of revelation, the flesh has a way of finding a way to glory. The flesh always has a way of trying to get in front and make sure everybody notices itself. And so Paul recognized that because of these great things that God has revealed to me, that it's possible that I would feel like it was all about me. And so God has allowed this thorn in my life. God has allowed this mountain in my life so that I can remain saved. God was using that thorn. He was using that mountain to protect the apostle from further danger in his life. And then the writer of Hebrews wrote about Jesus. He wrote in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Even Jesus prayed 3 times for the cross to be removed. He wanted the cup to be removed. He prayed 3 times that would be removed, but the cup didn't go away. The cross didn't go away until the cross had fulfilled its purpose. And once the cross had fulfilled its purpose, God needed that mountain. God needed that cross in order to accomplish what was necessary for God's purpose in the world. And like Jesus, there are some mountains we must endure. We despise the discomfort. We don't like the discomfort. We look forward to the improvement that this cross, that this mountain, that this thorn is going to bring about in our lives. Jesus looked beyond the cross. He looked beyond the mountain, and he saw what it was going to attain, what it was going to accomplish in himself and in the world, in all of the world to come, if he continued to live with that mountain in his future and that cross in his life. 3 things to remember. Number 1, God's not guilty. Number 2, if the mountain remains, you haven't been defeated. And number 3, let the mountain press you close to Jesus. Let that mountain move you and crowd you closer to him. Closer to him. We often waste a lot of energy figuring out what's motivating God. We wasted a lot of energy trying to figure God out and what makes him do the things that he's doing to us. We want to know why God doesn't do what we've asked him to do. But when the mountain remains, if it continues to be there after you've prayed, after you've fasted, after you've given him all the promises that he's given, if I prayed against this mountain, it's going, but the mountain stays. Now what do I do? It's time to dig faith's foundation deeper and to become more intimate with God, to become closer to God. Job quoted, and we've used this verse earlier tonight, Job chapter 5, verse 7, yet man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. But let's follow Job's thought further. Let's don't just stop with verse 7. But let's take it to the next verse. In verse 7 he says, yet a man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward. Verse 8, what are you going to do, Job, if the trouble comes? What are you going to do if the mountain remains? He says in verse 8, I would seek unto God. Unto God would I commit my cause, which doeth great things and unsearchable, marvelous things without number, who giveth rain unto the earth and sendeth waters into the fields, to set up on high those that be low, that those which mourn may be exalted to safety. When the mountain isn't removed, when the trouble is there, I'm going to seek God. I'm going to seek unto God. He's able. He can do great, unsearchable, marvelous things. My faith is not so much in the results. My faith remains in God. If the trouble is there, I'll live with the trouble, but I'm going to live believing that God can handle it, that God is in control, that God is. My faith is in God, not in results. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 11. Whereunto I am appointed a preacher and an apostle, and a teacher of the Gentiles, for the which cause I also suffer these things. Nevertheless, I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed. I am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed unto him against that day. Over time, that word persuaded is a key word. There possibly and probably was a time that Paul wasn't persuaded. There was a time that he wasn't sure that God would keep his promises and that God would keep whatever he committed. There may have been a lack of trust, but when over time, after Paul had watched God work and work and work time and time again in his life, he came to understand, I'm now persuaded that no matter what it is, God will handle it. God will keep whatever I commit to him. I can trust him. The most important issue here is not what happens to the mountain. The most important issue is, have I maintained my faith in God? Never forget, God can move mountains. Never forget, God does move mountains. He's moved mountains by the multitudes. He's moved lots of mountains. But if one doesn't move, it may be good to take another approach. Instead of beating your head against the fact that you've got a mountain that hasn't moved. Now we can pray, God, I have this mountain. I don't like it. I don't want it. I want it to be removed from my life. However, if you're using this as a tool to protect me from further danger, if you're using this mountain to change me, or if you're using this mountain for your glory, I will submit. I will submit to your will. I will worship you. I will believe in your ability. I will believe in your power. I will believe in your love for me. Because my faith is not in results. My faith is in you alone. And when mountains are not removed, God is still there. God is still powerful. God is still in control. And the most important thing is, have I maintained my faith in God? The greatest faith is not the kind of faith that moves mountains. The greatest faith is to trust God when mountains are not moved. To continue to trust him, to continue to believe in him, to continue to hold fast to your trust and your faith in God, regardless of whether God fulfills what you've asked him to do or not. Because he's not a Coke machine, a vending machine, where we put in our quarters and then ka-chunk, out comes the thing that we've asked for. He's not a vending machine. He's God. He does all things well. And the thing for me to do is recognize that he is God. He's been God a long time, and he's good at it. And so my trust and my faith will always be in my great God. Let's pray. Dear God, thanks for being God, for being in control. And thank you, O Savior, for allowing us to have a relationship with you. Thank you for allowing us to know you. Thank you for making it possible for us to go through this world knowing that you are with us, that you never forsake us. And all of the power and all of the strength that is in you is accessible to us. And just as you told the Apostle Paul, regardless of what we go through, regardless of how dark it is, regardless of how large it looms in our life, you have enough grace to supply us. You have enough grace that is sufficient for whatever it is that we face, that you will give us the ability to get through anything and everything that we face. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your power. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for being with us. In Jesus' name, amen.